Hello, I'm really so pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you. I have a rather extraordinary story which I have been asked to tell, but the story will relate to you and your children. And what I do now is working with children with autism in, again, a rather extraordinary way, which only came into being because of my own experience. So I'm going to lead you through this story. I gave birth to a child who was severely brain injured. This child had cerebral palsy, and I was told that nothing whatsoever could be done to help him. Hands were put on my shoulders. I was reassured that perhaps I should even put him into care. I was a single parent because his father had died before he was born. I had a beautiful daughter. I was told further that if I did take him home, which of course I fully intended to do, and in fact that was the first trigger that made me very conscious that something was missing from that understanding because of the deep loving bond that I had with him, which would be an absurd thing to be requested to give away my child. And with this loving bond, and wanting also to feel that my daughter was supported and loved, and this was going to be a positive time. He was mine, and I wanted to celebrate his birth. I took him home. I didn't give him the drugs that I was told to. I didn't leave him in his cot. I did what seemed the most sensible thing to do, was to take him back to where he had been before, which was on my body. Now, I didn't know enough then to realize that every breath that I took was going through Doran, that was helping him. So gradually, as time went by, over the first month that I had him at home, instead of being stiff and crying all the time, he seemed to relax. He seemed to be taking an interest in his surroundings. I had been told that he would never be able to sit, never to be able to communicate. His eyes seemed to roll together against the bridge of his nose. He appeared to be deaf, and yet I felt that somehow he was warming to life. Then, unfortunately, he had caught a kidney disease in the hospital, and we were hurriedly hospitalized again. And once more, I was with him all the time on the ward. Money was running out at that particular time in the UK for these hospital wards, and I was co-opted as a auxiliary nurse. This meant that I could be very close to him, and I felt that there was a continuation in the bonding between us and in the very breath that I was taking. He made a full recovery, which astounded everybody. But before we left the hospital, I was again told that he was severely brain injured, that nothing could be done, and I mustn't look for any possible alternative to this. So I took this also with a pinch of salt, curiously enough. I felt there was a great difference in Doran, great difference from the point at which I had first been given him to take home from the initial hospital. So I continued when we got home, not only to keep him on my person, but also to do things in patterns, to create patterns of movement for him in which my body was helping him. And I still felt my breath. So why was I so aware of my breath? Well, I'd been an artist, and as an artist, I taught life drawing. And when I was educating, helping my students to convey what they were seeing and feeling, I looked at the model's breath. The model was never still. Things were always changing and fitting into another configuration. I was very aware of the expressive breath. And I was also aware that Doran's breathing was odd. It seemed faster than I had ever expected. And he paused from time to time, held his breath. I wanted his breath to be more and more rhythmical, more like mine. I gradually began to find ways and means of helping his breath to develop, and also the connection between his breathing and his movement to develop. And in time, extraordinary things happened. So extraordinary, I was encouraged by a friend of mine who was a writer to write a book about him. And somehow, in the midst of everything else, I was able to achieve this. But by the time he was getting on for 6 years of age, even though he could now walk, I was beginning to feel that I was running out of understanding. And I felt I have to change. I have to change myself. I'm a loving, observant mother, as all loving, observant mothers are. And I think I have to somehow become a scientist. How do I do it? Well, because I had written this book, I sent it to the person who seemed most possible, which was the head of cerebral studies at London University, called Professor Patrick Wall. And I asked him if he could discuss with me my idea that somehow what made a brain injury chronic was the fact that breathing was also affected. So surprisingly, he invited me up. I talked to him. I met him several times. He was interested in helping me to do studies. And then he said, I think you should do a PhD, and I'll get you into the university to do this. This was amazing. It couldn't happen now. So suddenly I was in the psychology department. And in that department, I had access to all of these papers. I passed all my exams, and I began to understand now how it was that Doran could have arrived at this peculiar kind of breathing. And it seemed to be something that happened alongside his brain injury. When there is a drop in oxygen to the brain, then oxygen will be taken from the developing lungs and diaphragm to the brain to help the brain, which leaves a weakness. And then there is an alteration in respiratory controls, which begins to bring that breathing up to the upper chest or down to the lower abdomen. And so there was a basis for this. There was also the fact that his movements were still very uncoordinated, even though he could walk. And that the smooth rhythmicalness of early infant movements is what entrains movement to breathing. But I was also discovering that there were various types of normal breathing, and emotional breathing meant that you breathed momentarily with your upper chest and not with the big muscle underneath your rib cage, which is the diaphragm, which is a remarkable muscle, which I discovered was important for posture, was important for circulation, was important for the flow of lymph around the body, was important for the digestive system, was important for developing continence in the body. In fact, the development of the diaphragm was really what helped to integrate all the physical systems of the body together. And I began to see that's what is missing in children with neurological challenges. And gradually, I turned up a paper about autism. And this suggested that a part of the brain called the limbic system, which affects our breathing emotionally, was where the disconnect was. So I thought to myself, this emotional breathing, which creates a sort of arousal, then for a moment you're really interested and excited, and then you have to slide back to your diaphragm to be able to understand what's going on. Suppose these children are just stuck in their emotional breathing. And I noticed that this had to some extent affected Dawn, but then it had disappeared. And I saw from the papers that the part of the brain that had been affected in Doran was also slightly connected to the limbic system. Doran's problem was in the basal ganglia. It's just above the limbic system. So that interested me. He didn't seem to have the other symptoms of autism in terms of communication, but there seemed to be things in common, like digestion, easy emotional arousal from time to time. He was more aroused than one would normally expect. And as I went on, I realized that I now had enough information to write the beginning of my PhD, which would explain the causes and the symptoms, but I had to find a way out because I was even more sure that breathing was what was underpinning everything. And so I began to see that babies, fetuses, are already breathing, that this lovely muscle, the diaphragm, is moving inside them. And this movement helps to increase blood supply to the diaphragm and to the lungs. Not only that, I saw that the movement also is important for switching on genetic material in the lungs. And so I thought, well, can I reproduce those gentle kinds of movement? And I saw they were continued after birth by the smooth rhythmical movements that babies make. So this was quite exciting because I had something that I could try to copy. So of course I developed that first of all on myself and on Doran and my daughter. And then I had got a lot of friends because of my book. And I began to see that it may be possible, since these people were all keen to come and help me to learn to develop this approach on their own children and worked on themselves as well. So we raised money, and it was a good time for raising money. And we founded a charity and raised the money. And I began to treat children with neurological problems, which was now including children with autism. And I began to understand that those movements that are called stimming, those are the flapping sort of movements, these are normal movements that we all do when we're emotionally aroused. So I felt, my goodness, this is all connected to the limbic system, emotional arousal, wake up, be aware of something, but then relax and breathe down here. But they were all the time excited up there. And what I needed to help them learn, and also, of course, to help the digestive system, to help them calm down, to keep nice postural control and not have to be running around all the time, running around empty, exhausting themselves, was to bring them back to the diaphragm. And the very first child that I worked on was a little girl who couldn't walk, not because she couldn't walk physically, but because she didn't know what walking was. And she became very emotional very easily. And the parents were really at the last wit's end because they loved her. They didn't know whether they could still live with her. And gradually, by applying these exercises, not only did she first learn to walk, then she learned the difference between a wall and a door. And then she learned to speak. And then we began to learn more and more about her and what aroused her and what calmed her, and how much calmer she could now become and take in increasing amounts of information until she became a delight for them to live with and was able to go to school. So another little boy who was 2 years of age when I met him, and he couldn't stop moving at all. So parents really didn't know how to do these exercises because they was impossible to work with him when he's asleep. For many of the children, it's really easy to work when they're sleeping. So she just did a little here and there. Mother was at home, and gradually this made such a difference, even though it was applied in a very eccentric way. I taught the exercises to provide the skills to the parent. The parent was able to use them creatively, and lo and behold, little boy came and sat on her knee and became much more relaxed and much more aware, and was able to concentrate on things and not be constantly agitated. So another young lady who is now 18, she, when I first met her, really didn't seem to recognize anybody or show any emotion at all. And her movements, again, very uncoordinated and separating herself from the family. Now she's an integrated part of the family. She is calm. She writes beautifully. She has great insight. She's a poet. And she, again, is a joy in that family. Of course, I work with children across the whole range, and so much also is that the fact that their digestive system, because so many of the children have such a lot of problem there, begins to heal, because as the diaphragm moves, blood circulation improves, the gastrointestinal tract, the liver, the kidneys, the spleen, all the internal organs, which move up and down. You know, they move up and down with the diaphragm. When we breathe, everything moves. Our bodies are meant to move internally. So all this wisdom was creeping up on me more and more and more, and became more and more my joy to help families. So now it's possible to use Skype or Zoom and to work with families all over the world. And to be in their homes is actually, via this method, can be a great help. People also come to our center. And with this, we have created a very positive and delightful situation, which is very new and which is offering a new paradigm, because this is a new way in. This is something that can be restored. And with it, you begin to get a deep and steady restoration in the child. So please, please do contact me if you would like my help. I will be happy to talk to you, happy to have a consultation with you. I treat each family, each child as an individual. So don't be concerned if you think your child doesn't match the generality. It's not intended to. No child does match any generality. And I would welcome you. We have created a family here. And what I'm offering also is underpinned with happiness and with the heart. lindascotson.com